The next thing we look at is vulnerabilities. When an attacker is, well, trying to attack you, the first thing that they'll do, one of the first things they'll do, be after scanning, after getting versions of operating systems and files, the next thing they're going to want to do is find vulnerabilities. A vulnerability is a weakness in an asset, and this weakness can then be exploited by threat actors, by attackers, and then they can attack that system. So some of the reasons behind why we have vulnerabilities, there are many different reasons. Number one is it could be just misconfigured. You're at work, your boss gives you a widget and says, hey, I need you to get this widget up and running and onto the network. And you're like, oh, I've never seen this before. Let me see, let me turn it on. Oh, it has an interface. Oh, hey, oh, it works. Plug it in and that's it. And you didn't know how to use it. It was misconfigured. I see this happen a lot with devices at the home level where there's a video doorbell or an IoT device of some sort, and the person in their house who doesn't have any computer IT experience, once they get it working, that's it. They're just going to let it work, and because they didn't know what they were doing when they installed it, it's misconfigured, right? It's set up wrong. It has a default username. It has a default password. It has default protocols and ports that are open. It's misconfigured. It's a vulnerability. The next one is poor design. So when the application was created, it was designed poorly, and the network or the host-based application is just done wrong, or the technology itself is weak out of the box. And the main technology that I could think of is the one we're using right now on the internet, the TCP/IP suite, which includes technologies like HTTP, FTP, and others that send data clear text and are very easy to see everything that's going on. It's an inherent technology weakness. Also, careless approach of end users. All right, so I just try to make stuff work. I go to any website I want. I do things that are just careless and eventually leads to a potential vulnerability. So many different classifications for vulnerabilities, like we were saying just now. Misconfiguration, I install it wrong. I configure it wrong. Or I just run the default install. It works, and I'm like, okay, it works. I'm not going to touch it because I'm going to break it. And it's all default. In my classes, default is a 4-letter word. I don't want to hear that word in my class. No, you can actually say it, but default, the reason I say that is because if you leave defaults on systems, they are a beacon for attackers. In fact, if you want to see what I'm talking about, check this out. Open up a search window, a tab, into DuckDuckGo or into Google, and type in this term, default passwords. In the first 3 to 5 links, you'll find places where you can find default passwords. Click on maybe the second one, and what you'll see is it's divided into manufacturers. You can click on default password for Cisco, default password for D-Link, default password for Dell, default password for whatever manufacturer. Once you click on the manufacturer, it'll have a huge list of all the items that they manufacture and all the default logins, right? So defaults are pretty bad. And so what people do, what an attacker does, is finds an installation on a network, and first thing you do is try the defaults. The next thing we look at is buffer overflows. A buffer overflow is in an application. The application needs to reside in a certain place in memory, in RAM. And if it overflows that memory location, it can lead to all kinds of issues with that app, allowing an attacker to do everything from crashing the app and crashing the computer system to actually being able to sneak in, attack software onto a system through some type of local or remote file inclusion or other things. So buffer overflows, those can be used as a vulnerability for attack. Another vulnerability would be unpatched servers. You have a workstation, a server, a host that has not been patched. And since it hasn't been patched, it's vulnerable. Why? Because the patches are patches to remediate vulnerabilities. So if I'm missing hundreds of updates, I have hundreds of vulnerabilities. The next one we look at is over here, design flaws. So the application has been designed improperly for some reason, which is very, very common. The next one we look at is operating system flaws. Wait a minute. Why are they using the Microsoft symbol for operating system flaws? Oh, maybe they remember Windows Millennium Edition. No, over the years, Microsoft has had a bad reputation for releasing operating systems that have flaws, but in the recent past, they've been doing a huge amount better. If you've been around for a while, you might remember some of the older operating systems that would blue screen a lot. We don't see that as much, but it's not just Microsoft. We can put Linux logos and even there are operating system flaws for Macs and for your phone and for IoT devices and so on. If there's an operating system, there are flaws. All right, next thing we look at is applications that run on those operating systems. They have flaws. We have services that are open. They're not encrypted. The information that goes to and from the service can be read by attackers who are snooping on that transaction. We have, again, that 4-letter word, default passwords, default usernames, default accounts. Again, we see that with these other vulnerabilities as a very important vulnerability. Another one is zero-day or legacy platform vulnerabilities. And this might be a 10 and an 11 because zero-day is when the vulnerability is not known. No one knows about it. But an attacker does. The attacker finds the vulnerability, writes code to be able to attack the vulnerability, releases the code onto the network, the host, the entire internet in a campaign. And since it's never been seen before, antivirus software can't keep track of it. They don't know about it, and it's very successful. Another one would be legacy platforms. So legacy means old school stuff. You're using old hardware, old software, old platforms like IIS 6.0 or IIS 8.0 or a super old version. IIS, by the way, is the Internet Information System. It's Microsoft's web server. You're running a web server on a website on an old web server, or an old version of Apache, which is a web server you'll find more often on Linux, although you can get it from Microsoft too, and they're old. So they have vulnerabilities. So these are some vulnerability classifications. We have 10 of them, and under each of these, there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of types of vulnerabilities. So here's an example of network security vulnerability. So I was talking about the entire TCP/IP suite just a little bit before: HTTP, FTP, ICMP, SNMP, SMTP, and a partridge in a pear tree. I mean, there's so many of these different protocols that are inherently, there's nothing you can do about it. They're inherently secure because they're part of a protocol that was created a long time ago before people were worried about this type of security and hacking and so on. We have operating systems that are vulnerable because they can be inherently insecure or they're not updated. We have networks that can be vulnerable because there's no good password protection. You're allowing people to create three or four character passwords without any complexity, or maybe there's open logins without any authentication, or maybe they're using routing protocols on the network that are insecure, and the routing updates can be sniffed and you can get information about the network. Maybe the firewall is no good. It's vulnerable. It's not been updated. You can have a firewall on a network that might actually be a good firewall, but it hasn't been updated for a year. It's got a lot of vulnerabilities on it. We could have user account vulnerabilities where we have insecure transmission of user account details, like, oops, the password is listed if you scan for it. Or maybe it's in the website, and you can download the website and read the code, and there's the username. Or you can have system account vulnerabilities. Again, weak passwords. You can have internet service misconfiguration, where when you connect to the internet, JavaScript can run. Or, like I was saying before, your web server is misconfigured. You're running FTP. Oops, don't do that. That's totally not secure. Or you're running terminal services on port 23. These are all internet service misconfigurations. Or there's that 4-letter word again, default passwords, default usernames left on devices, or maybe the network device, the router, the switch, the edge network firewall is misconfigured. I tell you what, for network security, there can be a lot of vulnerabilities, but what about unwritten policies? Unwritten policies. What does that mean? That your organization has no security policies. And so if there's no security policy, then it's the wild, wild west out there. In other words, let's say that there's no written security policy about passwords. So it's up to the user, maybe the network administrator, maybe who's it up to decide what the password policy is. So maybe for one user, they don't know how to make a password that's more than 5 characters. So the network administrator allows them to do a 5-character password. And another user, you just don't have a policy. So there's no way to keep it the same. So with a policy, you can say all passwords must be 20-character passphrases. And then that gets implemented on every router, every switch, on the domain, on domain controllers, in every location. And now it's enforced. So lack of policy can be a big deal in a network in terms of security. Lack of continuity that enforces the policy that you have. Politics. Oh, that could be a big problem. I've seen this in many organizations, especially in larger organizations. But yeah, I've seen it in small ones too. And what happens is that there are different belief structures and desires in management to do things differently for different purposes. Like, for instance, let's say that there is a manager that went to school with a person that now runs a company, and because they've gone to school together, the manager wants to buy and install the product from that other person's company, but it's an inferior and an insecure product, but the manager uses his pull and influence among the other managers to get the product into the organization. That's politics. That's politics, right? And then you have this product that's inferior and installed on the system, causing vulnerabilities because of politics. Lack of awareness. You just didn't know. Let's say you have a user, sits by the back wall of the organization, and behind that back wall is the parking lot. In order to get to the parking lot, the user has to go out of that entrance to that section, through all the cubicles, out the entrance, down the hall, through the front desk, through the major front doors, and then go halfway around the building to get to that parking lot. But if you just open the door, there's the parking lot. So the user gets up, says, "Oh man, I left my pack of gum in the car." So the user opens the door, props it open, walks down the parking lot to go get the pack of gum. And meanwhile, somebody who's kind of hanging out says, "Oh man, that door opens now and then. Let me have a look in there." Looks inside the door, looks at the user who's still walking towards the car, walks in, looks around, finds a phone and a laptop just sitting on a desk, takes the phone and the laptop and leaves, and then walks away. And meanwhile, the user who propped the door open finally gets to the car, gets the pack of gum, closes and locks the car, walks all the way back to the door and unprops it and closes it, and has no idea that somebody's phone and laptop just got stolen. And when there's a review done, the user is interviewed. And the user is asked the question, why did you leave the door propped open? Did you not know that there's a policy? And he says, the employee says, who's a user and an employee, he says, wait a minute, excuse me, what? There's a policy about this door? Yeah, there's a policy that says all traffic has to go through the front doors, and you violated the policy. And let's say that genuinely this employee, this user has no idea that there is a policy about doing that. That's lack of awareness. Or maybe visiting sites they shouldn't visit on the internet, not knowing that there's a prohibition against these types of sites, even though they're not blocked. Lack of awareness. Working with emails in a way that exposes the organization, not knowing that doing this violates organizational policy. That is lack of awareness. So what we need to do is make sure employees are trained. Hey, welcome to training. Also, we want to keep an eye towards the impact that vulnerabilities have. They can disclose information. They can give an attacker unauthorized access to steal information about our identities, things like addresses and social security numbers, and damage the reputation of the organization, leading to financial losses. You can get sued, legal consequences, get data deleted, removed, changed, modified on the system. So there are a lot of impacts to vulnerabilities. So we want to make sure that we as an organization, you as somebody who owns or uses a computer system or device, to have as little vulnerabilities as possible.